Justin, Pearl, and Jacob with you here on a Tuesday. The Cincinnati Bengals, as we transition to football. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Joe Burrow. I mean, star power galore, no doubt about it, right? Trey Hendrickson, you think? Or you hope? Fingers crossed, right?
You got to count him at this point, right?
He's on the roster, so technically, yes. Yeah. So, there we go. The big four. Big 3.5. It's up to him whether it's a 3.5 or a 4 at this point. But we know how talented the Cincinnati Bengals roster is, and I think it's safe to say maybe a little top heavy. I think that the star power of Joe, Jamar, and T in the production of Trey obviously carries the load when you talk about, and I get the debates, when people take shots at Joe Burrow and the Bengals and say, well, look at all the help he has, they're referring to T and Jamar. Even when I've referred to that, like when we talked about the Justin Jefferson debate, who's throwing him the football versus who's throwing Jamar Chase the football. Like we always find ways to manipulate takes when it comes to what's around these individuals. But Joe Burrow definitely has an advantage when it comes to having Jamar and T. Higgins. But how much of an advantage is basically kind of watered out or canceled out when you look at the weakness of that offensive line, the fact that they're not one of the top running teams in football. No, that defense stinks, and special teams was a nightmare last year. We talk about the deficiencies of this Bengals team all the time, but then we get defensive when people point at the deficiencies of this team and say, well, that roster is not very good. We say it all the time that we talk about all the deficiencies, but when we highlight this team and say, well, they're a Super Bowl contender, they're an AFC North division contender, they could contend for the number 1 seed in the AFC. But then we talk about all the deficiencies, and it's like, how does that correlate? How does that make sense? Pro Football Focus put out their rankings based on the rosters in the National Football League, their roster rankings. And because of Joe, Jamar, and T, I was expecting to see them a little bit higher. I was expecting to see them at least in the top 10. They're not in the top 10. They're not even in the top 15. The Cincinnati Bengals come in at number 18. And the highlight in this article talks about their biggest strength in 2024. Of course, what we just talked about, the trio of Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins. And then right away, no surprise, no hot take here. And the same article talks about their biggest weakness in 2024, a very, very underwhelming defense. And that might still be the case heading into this season. It's going to have to be we have to see it to believe it, that this team has improved defensively. Minor adjustments made to the defense, minor additions made to the defense, obviously relying on a draft class to come in and make an impact, a new defensive coordinator, and now Golden. A lot of question marks still with this Cincinnati Bengals team. If we did our top 5 Super Bowl contenders, pretty confident a lot of people would put the Cincinnati Bengals there. Pretty confident Jacob possibly would. We'll get to that later. But it is weird talking about a roster that has so many question marks, so many deficiencies, but we're also so confident in saying, oh yeah, that's a Super Bowl contender. That's the talent of Joe Burrow, of course, and the confidence people have because of him. But number 18, are they the 18th best roster in football? Are there really 17? When you think about Joe, Jamar, and T, are there really 17, and Trey, are there really 17 rosters in the NFL better and more stacked than the Cincinnati Bengals? Do you agree with the ranking, Jacob, the Bengals at 18?
So when I saw this, my plan initially was to get really mad about it and scream and yell a little bit and say PFF's not worth the money and the subscription's dumb and all that stuff. But I'm gonna agree. I'm gonna jump in and I'm gonna agree with them, because now I don't have to deal with Joe Burrow has a great supporting cast. Joe Burrow has all the help. Joe Burrow's carried by his wide receivers. None of that. They have the 18th best roster in the NFL. So the fact that they're a top 5 Super Bowl contender with the 18th best roster means they must have a pretty damn good quarterback, right, Pearl?
I do agree with that.
Interesting. So yeah, no, I'm just I'm gonna add this one to the tool belt. I screenshot it, and yeah, if you want to give the Bengals the 18th best roster, when Joe Burrow drags that real bad roster to 11 wins in a playoff spot, that's gonna be fun. Underrated this year. I love it.
I mean, but we're used to being underrated. I don't know if I'd put them at 18, but...
No, it seems low.
Yeah,
it seems low.
But as Cincinnati sports fans, we're definitely used to being underrated in every aspect. So
yeah, if you go through the Bengals position groups, it's not hard to see how they got there, right? How they got to 18. I think we all, even the most pessimistic Joe Burrow fans in the world, the biggest haters in the world, would at least have him as a top 5 quarterback in the league, and in that room certainly gets there as well. If you want to go to the backups, we saw what Jake Browning was able to do a couple of years ago. I don't know how many 1-2 quarterbacks there are that's better than those two in the entire league. I love Chase Brown. What we saw from him last year, I'd be confident of putting him in the top half of the league in terms of running backs, and then Zach Moss, Samaje Perine, Tahj Brooks. I don't know how you could have that much lower than a top half of the league. Wide receiver, certainly number 1. If not number 1, then I guess you could argue number 2. But I would probably stop listening pretty early in that argument. Mike Gesicki at tight end, it's tough with Eric All hurt. I understand that he doesn't play, much of an inline tight end. He's more of a wide receiver. But I still think Gesicki, Drew Sample together, that's right around, that middle of the pack position for tight end in the entire NFL. And then the offensive line's poor. But I do think the tackle pair is a top 10 tackle pair in the NFL with Orlando Brown and Amarius Mims. Now, I understand the interior 3 positions. Ted Karras, I like him a lot more than a lot of other people. But those inside positions are big question marks. And I have no problem if you want to put them, down in the 20s. I think they'll surprise a lot of people this year. But where you get to the problem is the defense. And I understand a lot of this is Bengals optimism, thinking these guys are higher than they are. But B.J. Hill, McKinley, Jackson, Howard, Cross, T.J. Slayton in the middle, those are guys that are much better than they were last year on this defense defending the run. So hopefully they can take a big step. And I know that's optimism, so there's no expectation you have that ranked very low. The only position on defense I would have ranked in the top half of the league is linebacker. I think adding Barrett Carter, adding Demetrius Knight, getting Logan Wilson back healthy, Jermaine Pratt is still here. I think that group is a top half of the league group on this defense. Other than that, everything is projection, so I have no problem ranking this defense somewhere in the 20s. And then McPherson, where do you stand? Where can you stand at this point on McPherson? 2 years ago, he was a shoo-in to the Bengals all-time team if you were building a special team just because of that playoff run. And then last year, he was abysmal and all but cost us a playoff spot. I don't know if I want to put all the blame on him, but certainly makes 1 or 2 kicks in the right spots, and we're going to the playoffs. So it's frustrating, and I don't know what you do with Evan McPherson. I guarantee you the Bengals don't bring in any competition for him, but that defense is certainly poor. I think it's going to surprise some people this year, but the offense should be able to carry that above league average. I would certainly have him at least top 15, top 16.
So what it comes down to, and again, it's one thing, okay, so the Bengals come in at 18. Great. I think we can understand the justification of it to a certain extent. A lot of question marks at special teams. The defense has been bad the last couple of years. It ultimately led to Lou Anarumo, who, of course, was the architect of the defense that helped lead them to a Super Bowl a few years ago. They bring in Al Golden. So there's question marks special teams, question marks with the defense. You like the running back room, but there's still question marks with the run game and obviously the offensive line. So there's still a lot of question marks. The fact that they come in at number 18, despite the fact that you're still very positive about this team's ability to go compete and contend for a division title and a Super Bowl, it's because of the talent that is there in Joe Burrow, Jamar, and T, as we talked about. But also, to me, it wasn't so much I was as shocked that they were at 18. I guess it's the teams in front of them. Right. And the thing is and a lot of times, okay, if the Bengals have the 18th best roster, that means, okay, do you want to move up that list? You want a better roster. Would you trade spots with any of these teams ahead of you at this point? And that's the big question. So, like, for instance, the Bengals are at 18. The Chicago Bears come in at number 17. Are you buying that the Bears have a better roster or a better team than the Cincinnati Bengals? And maybe those two things aren't exclusive.
It's a tough question.
Better team, better roster, maybe not exclusive.
The star power in Cincinnati certainly drives them, where I think the common fan would pretty easily say that the Bengals have a better roster. I think if you ask people off the street to rank NFL rosters, the Bengals would probably come in close to the top 10, just because of the Bengals positions that are lacking are the ones that you don't get to play in fantasy football. So that's why I feel like most people do have the Bengals higher. But the Bears went out and attacked that offensive line this offseason. They added Joe Thuney. They added Jonah Jackson. They already have Darnell Wright and Braxton Jones at tackle. That offensive line is a top 10 offensive line in football. And that's a pretty big discrepancy to the Bengals' offensive line. Now, obviously, there's a big discrepancy as well between Caleb Williams and Joe Burrow. But I don't know how they weight all that, because the offensive line that we do usually group it together, that is 5 positions. So if you are better at all 5 of those, it certainly helps the conversation point. And then where the Bengals usually pick up a lot more ground is that wide receiver with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. I don't know if the trio in Chicago is better than the Bengals trio. If you add in Andrei Iosivas, going DJ Moore, Roma Dunze, Luther Burton, that's pretty special there as well. And then the running back room of DeAndre Smith, Roshan Johnson, I think falls pretty close to Chase Brown and the Bengals as well. And then the Bears have a better defense. So I do think the Bears roster is a little bit better than the Bengals, though I do think the Bengals are a better team than the Bears just because of who they have playing quarterback and who's touching the ball every play and his ability to overcome some of those shortcomings. So while I do agree, if you're asking me which one of these teams is going to make a run at the Super Bowl, I would still say the Bengals.
If Caleb Williams takes that next big step, and I'm not saying Caleb Williams takes that big step and is better than Joe Burrow, I don't think that's going to happen. But if Caleb Williams, obviously with an offensive-minded head coach, we heard about the chaos and the circus that was the head coaching staff, the coaching staff before, basically not showing him how to watch film, not basically coaching him up, training him, that type of thing. If Caleb Williams takes that next big step, is there a gap between a team like the Bears and the Bengals at that point? And again, doesn't mean Caleb is Joe, but it just means if you get top 10 QB play from Caleb Williams, that's a huge difference maker for a team like the Bears at that point.
Yeah, you're asking the wrong guy here, because if you've watched this show for any amount of time, you know how big of a Caleb Williams guy I am. So yeah, I think if he plays the level that we have some expectation for this year, I think the Bears not only compete for the NFC North, but we're talking about what we saw from the Commanders last year with Jaden Daniels kind of not taking any time to get to that level. I think if Caleb can play at that level of Jaden last year, or even what we saw from Drake May at the back half of this year, or at the back half of the rookie year as well, I think the Bears, the sky is the ceiling for them. I don't know where they'd stop. I think the Bears are going to be really, really good this year.
What do you think about teams like the Dallas Cowboys and the Atlanta Falcons being ahead of the Bengals on this list as well?
Falcons, I agree with. Cowboys, not so much. I think the Falcons are a special team. And maybe, Michael Penix is driving that down in the eyes of a lot of other people because we haven't seen him a ton yet. And obviously, Kirk Cousins, if he was starting, I wouldn't have them ranked very high. But I think their offensive weapons are maybe second to none in the NFL. With Bijan Robinson at running back, I still have faith, at least in the receiving aspect, of Kyle Pitts. Drake London is a special receiver on the outside, and they have a pretty solid offensive line with a young defense, the best safety in football in Jesse Bates, we know well up here, and A.J. Terrell is one of the best lockdown corners in all of football as well on the outside there. So they add two edge rushers, dominant guys that we talked about the Bengals wanting in this draft class, James Pierce and Jalen Walker from Georgia, both going on that defense. Now, the Falcons did give Jalen Walker number 11, which made me very upset. You don't disrespect Julio Jones like that. He hasn't even retired yet, and you're giving his number away, but that's beside the point. I think they're both going to be phenomenal players. That defense is going to take a big step. Michael Penix is going to take a big step. I love Raheem Morris, so if you're adding coach to this roster rankings, I think they have a pretty significant leg up over Zach Taylor and the Bengals as well. So, yeah, I don't have as much problem with the Falcons. But the Cowboys, you think George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb are anywhere close to T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, Skinner?
If Pickens gets his head out of his ass, yes, but I'm not taking them over. I'm not taking them over Jamar and T, but at Pickens talent-wise with CeeDee Lamb, absolutely. I think they're one of the best 1-2, duos in the NFL. But again, it's the mental side for Pickens and him being able to get out of his own way. So I don't trust him. So that's the huge gap right there. Pickens isn't better than CeeDee is one of the best receivers in football. I'm still taking Jamar over him. I like the duo in Dallas. It just looks better on paper than what I think it's going to be, especially when you have inconsistent Dak at times. How frustrated is he going to be? George Pickens, that is. So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah.
But yes, I see what you're saying.
I 100% agree. I just feel like if you're banking on, the question marks of the Cowboys offense, and we know the question marks their defense presents as well, I feel like they're pretty close to the Bengals, and when you look at their star power, there's more consistency for the Bengals side of things. So I don't understand how you could have the Cowboys above the Bengals when you're going down the list. I mean, they lost Zach Martin and Tyrone Smith this year. Their offensive line is going to be just as big of a question as ours is. So I think there's a lot of issues with the Cowboys, and if you go into the coaching aspect again, like I just said with the Falcons, Brian Schottenheimer, I mean, come on. I'll just leave it there. Come on.